Hello, and welcome to Letters Home, a story of a World War II B 17 pilot from Lowell, Michigan, in his own words. And he just so happens to be my grandpa. I'm your host, Annie Whitlock, and I'm joined by my co hosts, my dad, Mitch McMahon, and my aunt, Lori Summerfield.
In each episode of Letters Home, we're going to dive into the letters written by my dad during his time in World War II that he sent to his parents, siblings, and friends back home in Lowell, Michigan. We'll read his own words and giving some context into what was happening in the world and in Lowell at the time that he wrote these.
In this episode, we're digging into Bruce's time in the Santa Ana Air Force Base in May 1942. We're going to read parts of 3 letters he wrote home during his first week at flying school. Our Lowell historian, Dale Croft, is here to talk about World War II veterans of Lowell, and we'll all try to guess who Kitty was.
Yep. So before we get into our second episode here, we want to introduce a new segment that will no doubt make frequent appearances on this podcast. We're calling it right now, What We Got Wrong. Since we're all amateur historians and we're all over 40, some of us more over 40 than others. Inevitably, sorry guys.
Here, here.
And I had to put that in there. Inevitably, our recollections and our research will need correcting. And only one episode in, we already have things to correct. So, Dad, Aunt Lori, what did we get wrong? Dad, you want to go first?
Well, I
from
was
episode 1?
speaking about Dad's first mission, and I said it was a ball bearing plant at Schweingard, but it was Schweinfurt. And I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing that right, so that might be another correction next week. We'll get to this mission in more detail eventually in this podcast.
And I was given the yearbook from Dad's time at CMU, and when I looked back, Bruce was the CMU class vice president, not president. And also, just to clarify...
We bumped him up a little bit.
I did. And also to clarify, a former student, a part of the Knuthstrups, live on Reservoir Hill now.
And we'll be talking lots more about Reservoir Hill, I'm sure, in this podcast as well. So this time we ended up catching these corrections ourselves after we were listening to episode 1. But if any listeners out there have a correction for us, please comment or message us on Facebook, Instagram, or we believe YouTube. We'll have a kind of a video version of this podcast up there soon. And then we will rectify it in a future episode and give you credit for correcting us, for sure. So in our last episode, we introduced James Bruce McMahon to you all, and today we're actually going to get into some of his letters. That's the whole point of Letters Home. Before we do, I want to remind everyone that you can see the letters and other primary sources on the Lowell Historical Museum website, all curated by our guest, Dale Croft. Welcome back to the podcast, Dale.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We need to insert applause or something.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Dale, why don't you tell us a little bit about the visuals on the website? You have pictures of Bruce's medals.
Yeah, we have Bruce's. One of the pages you'll be seeing in the media section is all the awards and service stars and clusters and ribbons that he earned over his 38 missions that he flew. We have the Distinguished Flying Cross. He earned Air Medal, Bronze Service Stars, Bronze Oak Leaf Clusters, 4 campaign ribbons, and his St. Christopher keychain. Also on that page is something a little strange. I think it was a souvenir. It was a War Merit Medal. It was a World War II German military decoration awarded to recognize outstanding service by civilians in relation to the war effort. So that has to be some souvenir he picked up or something along the way. Also, we'll be talking about, he flew 4 different fortresses during his 38 missions. 4 of them were damaged beyond capable of flying. His 4 planes were called Miss Michigan, which had a large portion of the wing hit by a camouflage. O'Reilly's daughter was the second plane. The third plane was Mary Max. And the 4th plane, his last plane that he finished all these missions in, was the captain and his kids. And you'll get to see a picture of that actual plane with some of his crew coming up in the podcast, the visual PDF files that we have. So we're looking forward to, you'll find more detailed information about all the awards that he earned for his missions.
Interesting. Does he get to name the planes, or who names those?
Yeah, he talked about a little bit in some of his letters.
Okay,
He didn't know what he was
we'll
going
get
to
to
name the first plane, and he came up with Michigan Miss. I don't know about O'Reilly's daughter. Maybe that was one of the pilots.
Kitty, maybe Kitty.
Maybe it was Kitty. I don't know. Mary Max obviously has to be
I don't
the
know.
McMahon name. Maybe I don't know. Mary
Like
Max.
M-A-C, Mary Mac?
I don't know.
M-A-C-S?
Oh,
We'll
Captain.
find out.
Captain and the Kids was a cartoon.
The Capajammer Kids?
Yeah.
No.
Well, it
No.
was created in 1914, so he ended up. The cartoon was actually in the newspaper. It was called Captain and the Kids, and there'll be some examples of that in some of our media. The video file that we make, the YouTube video file we make, I found some interesting Captain and the Kids cartoons that he named his last plane out. You'll also see some pictures of the 4 planes that he flew and the damage that they took. Michigan Miss had some. The right wing was about a third of it was missing when he came in. So,
Wow.
that's amazing story.
That's great. So, yeah, we'll be going into more detail on all of these things. This is just a little preview. If you see the primary sources and the visuals on the lowellmuseum.org website, they'll be there along with all we discuss them in the different podcast episodes. So let's get into it today. We mentioned that Grandpa Bruce left his senior year of college at CMU, fire up, to enlist in early 1942. And by April of that year, he knew that he was heading to Santa Ana, California for flying school. One of the earliest letters we have from Grandpa Bruce was actually a postcard that he sent to his parents from Amarillo, Texas, on the train on the way to Santa Ana. And now Aunt Lori's going to read Bruce's own words.
Private James B. McMahon, Army Air Corps Cadet, on the train, May 25th, 1942. Dear folks, all we've been doing is riding and more riding. The heat is terrific. Expect to arrive in Santa Ana about noon Wednesday. Past a lot of troop trains going out. There are about 180 men on this train. All my love, Bruce. Riding, I didn't pronounce that really. He was just riding and riding on the train, yes.
If you go to the museum website to see this postcard, you'll notice that the postcard has a place for a 1-cent stamp, but Bruce had written free over it. Just a couple months earlier, in March 1942, Congress granted military personnel the right to send letters via first-class mail for free. So you all know these are communications, cost nothing for Bruce to send.
Yeah, it was all free. This postcard and all of his letters to his parents are addressed simply to Mr. and Mrs. F.J. McMahon, Lowell, Michigan. So I found that amazing. Like, I know that zip codes weren't implemented until 1963. Dad, you had told me that you were older than zip codes.
Oh yeah,
So then I
by
had
quite a bit.
then I had to look up the exact year. But I was still surprised that there was no need for a house number. So apparently everyone just knew how to find the McMahon house in Lowell. So, I mean, in our last episode, we mentioned Reservoir Hill a lot. That's how you all referred to where you lived. But without giving away where Aunt Lori specifically lives now, where is this? Where is this place, this Reservoir Hill in Lowell that we keep talking about? Like, how can we describe it to people? Clearly, everyone in the 40s knew
It's
just how
the
to send
reservoir
them.
for all the water for Lowell.
Yep.
I mean, how?
Up the hill from the Methodist Church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
there you
Okay,
go.
that's
Yep.
a good way to describe
The city that part where the reservoir is, and the city officials go and check on that water reserve.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think Grandpa Frank used to go in and pull the rats out of there and stuff. I hope
actually-
that didn't turn everybody off.
Actually, I think now is a good time to insert. We have up there as well a radio tower now that didn't used to be there, and
Nice.
the radio tower services WRWW where we are here today at Lowell High School. It also is a radio tower for WION as well. And thanks to WRWW. 92.3 FM, and then also the you can stream it at lowellradio.org. Thanks to them for letting us come on in and record the podcast here.
Absolutely.
But that's right up there. That's right up on Reservoir Hill now.
Okay. Yeah, and Frank lived up there and Bruce eventually, right? Like, so they both lived near each other. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they lived in the same house for quite some time, but then
Yeah,
Bruce
and then
built
Dad
his
built the
there,
house.
too.
Yep.
All right, so if you hear us talk about Reservoir Hill, that's where we're talking about. So by May 28th, 1942, Grandpa's train had arrived at Santa Ana Air Force Base, and he wrote a letter the next day, right after he got there, addressed Dear Kitty. Does anyone know who this is? Who is Kitty, or was Kitty?
We haven't figured it out.
It's clearly someone he wanted to write to, like the minute he got there. So was no one in the family was called Kitty? I was
I'm
like,
going to ask maybe a nickname of a family member.
yeah, maybe.
I'll ask around.
He wouldn't have called his own mother Kitty, right?
No.
No.
No. No. I was trying to think of a Catherine, or I was trying to think of somebody that might have had that nickname, but I don't know. We'll figure that out. A good mystery to.
Maybe we'll have to look in one of the annuals or something. Maybe there was a girl in his class that was
Oh,
Kitty.
that's a good point. We could
Maybe.
check.
I don't know.
We could check a Lowell. Well, if he would have been a. Well, we don't know if it would have been a high school friend or a college friend. Look at that CMU yearbook
Right.
and see.
Yep.
Yeah, well, we don't know. We don't know who he's writing to in this one. Most of his letters are written to either his mom or dad or his brothers or sisters-in-law. But yeah, this is Kitty, and I didn't know who that would have been referring to, but we'll find out. So this is how Bruce describes his second day at camp to Kitty in his own words. Aunt Lori?
Thursday. Dear Kitty, well, this is the second day in camp, and I think it's going to be all right. Of course, they aren't selling beer here, and there aren't many hostesses around, but the food's good, the climate's swell, and the work isn't tough. If I can only pass my physical, I'll be really on my way.
Right. And he goes on to describe, in that same letter to Kitty, his daily schedule at Santa Ana. So, Dale, this is where we'll have you come in. What else can you tell us about what went on?
Well, in researching some of this data here, I found the actual book of Santa Ana that all the cadets had to read and abide by, and all the rules, etc. So Santa Ana Army Air Base, called SAAB, was a huge classification and pre-flight center on the West Coast where new aviation cadets were indoctrinated into military life. They were given rigorous medical exams and numerous aptitude and physical tests to determine whether they were best suited to be pilots, navigators, or bombardiers.
Okay.
Once their classification had been chosen, they entered 9 weeks of pre-flight training.
So he references also taking classes at Santa Ana in this same letter to Kitty a little bit later on. What kind of classes did they take?
Well, in the SSAB book, the courses included military training, physical training, academic instruction in such subjects as maps and charts, mathematics, Morse code, military courtesy and customs, military hygiene, naval and aircraft identification, organization of ground forces, physics, and safeguarding military information,
Oh,
to name a few.
okay. We definitely, some of his future letters I know talk about physics and chemistry classes or things that he's taking. So this will be interesting. But he was worried about the physical exam, right? Pass his physical.
Oh, yeah.
'Cause we don't remember he cheated on his eye exam.
In one of his next letters, probably in the next couple of weeks, he talks about he was all excited because he passed the physical exam. So, and we knew he probably would because he was such a gifted athlete here.
Yeah, it's just
Lowell High School.
his eyesight is what he was worried
Yeah.
about. I think,
Yeah.
more than anything.
That's the only thing he was worried about. So quite a few of our first podcast episodes here will be about Grandpa's letters about his time in Santa Ana, since he was in that 9-week pre-flight training. So we'll be coming back to research on Santa Ana and what exactly they did there. But for our next segment, we're going to talk about what was going on in the world and in Lowell the last week of May 1942. In this episode, we're going to actually focus more on what was happening in Lowell at the time. And for Memorial Day 1942, the Ledger published a list of names of men from Lowell who were serving in World War II at that time. There were nearly 200 men on this list. I did a rough count based on, blowing my screen up really big to count all the names. I don't know if this list included like the townships around Lowell or if it was just the city of Lowell, but but either way, that's about 10% of the population at the time. So do you know, Dale, what do you know about what the Lowell Historical Museum has done to capture the stories of World War II veterans from Lowell?
Well, on our website, we have under collections and research, we have Oral History Project. which we have interviewed 57 veterans from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And some of the interviews were done by high school students as a history project, as well as some other people have interviewed some of the veterans. Some of the veterans are Jack Lally, King Doyle, Alan Wisner, who was one of the pilots that was shot down over Slovakia. And we'll probably be doing some kind of historical story about him. Marianne Watkins, Gloria Jackson was nurses during that time, just to name a few. So there's a couple of them that are kind of tough to listen to.
A few weeks before Grandpa left for Santa Ana, apparently he was a pallbearer for a 21-year-old who died in a plane crash on active duty in Virginia. Someone named Bobby Finis, and he was in this funeral with someone named Bernard Croft. Is that a relation to you, Dale?
Yep, first cousin.
All right, so the Ledger reported this on May 7th, 1942, and at the time of the Memorial Day publication of the list of men, Bobby was listed there with two other men who had died at that point, Roland Frazier and Gerald Ellis. So I don't know if any of you know who they are. Did not recognize their names either.
Yep.
But I'm sure over the course of the war, there were others. And these must have been people that Grandpa knew. Lowell's a small town, right? And they're all about his age, early to mid-20s. So do you know how many Lowell men died in the war, Dale? Or do we have any way to find this out?
Checking into it a little bit, there's no real solid data about the numbers yet. I called the VFW Hall and stuff, and nobody was real accurate on that information, at least at this time, I can find.
So this is where we need our listeners' help, right? So from time to time, we're
go.
going to mention people, events, places in Lowell that we see in our research, and we're doing our best historical analysis, but we definitely want to hear from anyone who may have more information or better and more accurate information about any of the non-McMahon people that we mentioned. We got the McMahon people down, but maybe not even then. Sure. But please comment or message us on Facebook, on our Instagram or YouTube if you have more information for us on any of the people and places and events that we mentioned, and we'll definitely read it in a future episode so we can just continue to add to this story. So we want to end today, kind of our last conversation, with a full letter. So we've been reading little snippets or a postcard, but now we want to read the full letter from Bruce detailing his very first week at Santa Ana. So Dad, why don't you take this one in his own words?
Friday, May 29th, 1942. Dear Mother, don't expect letters twice a week regularly from me, but as long as we don't have any more to do than at present, I'll write you every opportunity that I have. I think it will be possible to write Wednesdays and Sundays, but if sometimes I miss, don't be anxious because we never know when we go on evacuation. It seems they worry about an air raid from the Japs out here in reciprocation for the bombing we gave Tokyo. This camp life is so far as duck soup for me. My feet are holding out in good shape and I get a big kick out of drilling. We do some pretty fancy drills and our food is exceptionally good. The morale in this army is good. On the way out here we would stop and practically every train is a troop train. The men were all in good shape and spirits. We don't hear any war gossip here at all. Everything is highly censored and rumors fly thick and fast with little authenticity to back them up. Most of the talk is about what each respective student is going to go into. After we move out of here, probably in 2 months, we'll probably get into more warlike surroundings. The only scare out here is that they may bomb this base, but if they do, they're in for one big surprise. This place will be able to take care of itself both on the ground and in the air. SAAAB is located 10 miles from the Pacific. So far, I haven't been homesick, but I imagine when I get a furlough, maybe along about Christmas, if lucky, I'll be sure glad to see home again. The toughest thing here is that we can't leave the post for 1 month. Well, I've got to go to mess, so I'll close. Would you send the ledger? All my love, your loving son, Bruce. It's Jimmy now.
It's amazing. Any reflections on this letter?
I think he was kidding about the Jimmy part.
You think so?
Well,
maybe.
I'm not sure. I don't think he expects his mom and dad to start calling him Jimmy.
No, probably not.
But
Maybe Jimmy at the base. I mean, maybe they were teasing him about it or something, or calling him Jimmy.
I think what you're going to find is that through the course of all these letters that go from 1942 to 1945, when he's really in the thick of things, his attitude about the war changes. He changes. And I think that's going to be interesting to see that.
Yeah, he's pretty positive about it. in this letter, right? Like everything's good, the food's good. I mean,
I think a lot of that was he just didn't want to worry mom and dad, grandpa and grandma very much. I think that was a big part of it. I think he was very aware of that.
yeah. Yeah, anything else? I liked I love the slang that you hear here and there in these letters. It's like duck soup. It's all duck soup. There's other ones too where this is 1940s slang that I'm really interested in. We're gonna bring that back. Bring back duck soup. Nope. All right. I was curious.
Never left.
I never really left. I was curious about the part in this letter where he references the bombing we gave Tokyo. I wanted to look into this more because I wasn't sure. I didn't know what he was talking about. And I think he's referring to the Doolittle raid here. So in April 1942, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle planned and led the first air raid on Japanese islands after Pearl Harbor. So if you've seen the movie Pearl Harbor, Alec Baldwin's character, that's Jimmy Doolittle. So anyway, I know that movie isn't historically accurate very well, but that's who he plays. Anyway, the raid didn't go very well. There was no major damage to Tokyo and minimal Japanese casualties, and all 16 American aircraft in the raid either crashed or bailed out, and 14 Americans died. So Doolittle was pretty sure he was going to be court-martialed when he got back to the U.S., but instead, the raid really boosted morale for Americans after Pearl Harbor because it showed that Japan was vulnerable through the air, and the story of the 80 men who survived the raid was inspirational, and they were all awarded medals when they got back. So I think this is what he's referring to because he talks about it with such like reverence and they're in for a surprise when they come to bomb, if they're going to come bomb us. I have no confirmation of this, but just piecing dates together.
No, I think that's what it was about. How many people survived that?
It says, well, my research had said 80 men survived.
They had to keep going to land in China. Some
Yeah.
of the ones that found it, they landed in China. And got,
Like Chinese civilians helped them.
Yeah, a lot of
get
help
back.
there. So it was,
And
an amazing story there to even Doolittle working so hard to even get them off of the flight deck of an aircraft carrier.
Yeah, there was
A
some.
B-17.
It didn't go out as planned or something.
And
And,
it was,
and Doolittle landed, I guess, in a pile of literal crap. And that's how he was saved,
Oh.
right? And I think that's.
That's the story.
it's a
I don't know
great-
if that's in the movie Pearl
it's
Harbor.
a
I
great,
forget.
I'm sure there's literature out there about this, the whole books or stories about it because it's a great story. And like you say, it made the Japan think twice now that that's possible that we could get hit.
Yeah. So that's well. Any other thoughts on this letter in particular before we
No,
sign off?
I don't have any.
We never
thoughts.
did solve who Kitty is,
No.
but
Actually, I
Phone
got
lines aren't lighting up.
I got kind of quiet there because when you were saying that about Dad being, optimistic or happy, he hadn't flown a fighter. I mean, he hadn't flown a B-17 and come back with crew that were no longer living with him.
Yeah.
I think about
not at this point. No.
right, not at that point. So he didn't really know that, all of what was going to come. So
Yeah, that's true. So that's it for us today. In our next episode, we're going to get more into Grandpa's time at Santa Ana, including some more of his, what I call his pensive letters home. So a
He
little
did get a little more
homesickness.
homesick, yeah.
He got a little more homesick as the weeks go on. So thank you for listening to Letters Home. We hope you continue to listen as we go through Bruce's story. The Lowell Historical Museum has digitized versions of Grandpa's letters so you can read them in full, along with primary sources for most of the people, places, and events we've talked about here today, plus more. New episodes and more primary sources drop every Thursday on the Lowell Historical Museum website and Facebook page. You can listen to Letters Home on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the Lowell Historical Museum website and YouTube channel. You can also follow the Lowell Historical Museum on Facebook and the Letters Home podcast on Instagram at Letters Home Lowell. See you next time.